Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you really quickly because I know we're all really excited, and I'm not as funny as our other presenters. But I am going to talk to you about some of the seriousness of where our education system is today. Those of you from District 6, that's my home. I went there as a student. I was a student, teacher, administrator in District 6, so that's where my roots are. But I do want to say that we're in a trying time as a nation right now. And when you're at a district, you may or may not feel it, but it is a time for us to shift. And I don't know if we've made that shift. So I was lucky enough to be in Rhode Island, good, bad, or ugly. My governor at the time, who is now the Secretary of Commerce, said, we are not closing down schools. So we closed from March to June during the pandemic, and that was it. June 27th, we started summer school. In person, run by the state. So my office was in charge of running summer school for every single district, because we understood that the superintendents were on the ground and needed support. Couldn't figure that out by yourself, because we were figuring it out. The Department of Health was figuring it out. How many times did we hear, don't wear a mask, then wear a mask? How many of you learned about air quality? Prior to the pandemic, I didn't know what an HVAC was. I bet you know what an HVAC is now. So we created something, we called it the EDOC, where we brought the Department of Health, Department of Education, and our, our military. And we manned a command center from the Department of Education so that our superintendents, principals, and teachers could continue to do their work. And we deployed teams to all our districts to help the superintendents figure out how to make this work. How are we going to keep in-person happening? And that was hard. I think for all of us, this is probably the hardest thing that we're ever going to go through. At the time, the science was being ignored. The numbers were being ignored. But we moved forward. And I say that to say, not to toot our own horn, but what's important is, what is your relationship with the policymakers? You should not have people that are not in the system making decisions for the system. So what does that mean? How many of you are superintendents of the building? How many of you are principals? How many of you are classroom teachers? Parents? Well, let me just tell you something. Education has changed. Whether you believe it or not, you are now politicians as well. Because those people in those seats, you have to leverage. You have to leverage the people that make decisions and bring in the money. Because if you don't do that, you will be left out. And I want to share with you a little bit of what it means to kind of be in a position where I oversee the state, but I also have taken over Providence School District. So I'm the commissioner as well as the superintendent in a failing district. The important part is to really see policy as a lever. And what that means is that you put pressure on people like me to give you what you need. Policy has to be your friend. So as we came back in the summer, running it from the state level, one-to-one devices, we did that. We also called all of our companies, AT&T, Verizon, we need free Wi-Fi in the whole state. They gave it to us. We bought the devices with the same dollars that you have. Is this being recorded? Okay. We'll take it out, okay. So I let them use whatever dollars they wanted. Whatever dollars. We're in a pandemic. We weren't following the rules, so our kids didn't have what they needed because we were following rules. Forget about that. Buy the equipment. So the middle of June, we had our devices. We had Wi-Fi. We put stations out where there wasn't enough Wi-Fi because, believe it or not, there's some rural districts in Rhode Island. Put a bus there with Wi-Fi to give it to the whole city. We gave it to the parents, everybody that had a smartphone. It is about solution making. And my greatest fear for all of us is that I see us falling back to where we were pre-pandemic. So what did you learn during the pandemic? Who can tell me? What did you learn? What did you learn? Yes. We have to work together. Help and resources, yes. How important technology is. What else did we learn? Parents. Yeah. Anything is possible. Yes. But tell me, in your tables, we've just lived through a global pandemic. We're back. What are 3 things that if you had the power to change in education that you would? 3 things that if you had the power and money was not an issue, what would you change?
This quickly. Oh, there we are. One of them, I think it would be great if every student has a resource, every student. There was one big thing that we had an issue with, at least in Montreal. Not everyone have the same resources. So you want to do the best things you can, but if the kid can't go online, then we can't do it. I really think one of those 3 things would be a lot of attention to the teacher. There's so much attention on the student, and of course it is the number, it's most important, but where are we in all this? I think this is a big problem that we have, is that we get so focused on the students, but we really need to focus on us as well. And this pandemic really opened my eyes on that. It was really hard. And if we had the support for the teachers, what I mean by that support is, I wish we each had a teacher assistant. I wish that administrators would give more days off for the teachers, or give them, I don't know, massages or yoga classes or something. Hey,
you're going to be on that beach.
You said money, no object, right? But if the teachers have a good well-being, then we can do more for the students. And see, in the end, it ends up being for the student. But if we are not well, we will not be there for them. And I can say it from experience. We have to be really well for us to do good for them. So one of those 3 things I feel needs to be for the teacher. More attention for us. Yeah, and number 3, I'm not sure what else.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? I know you had your hand up.
Here we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So for me, what I would do is I would make it more equitable for students with special needs and parents of students with special needs. I found that there was a lot of struggle in that area over the pandemic. I would also, once again, yes, I'm a passionate special education teacher, so I'm gonna ride for them. So I would also immerse special education teachers into specific studies in terms of the different disabilities in order to effectively meet the needs of the students that we see on a day-to-day basis. And last, I would generate a lot of funds for new teachers that are coming into the classroom where they get more than just mentoring, but consistent training on how to get the job done.
Okay? Anyone else? Think big. We have big dollars. What are we going to do? Yes?
Thank you. So he said,
Social emotional for teachers and students. Like, we really need resources for that.
Yeah.
So research has shown that there is what we call a burnout spiral, and it affects not only our teachers, but also affects our students. And so when you're at the top of the spiral, you have good stress and you have bad stress. Good stress is starting to learn how to adapt, how to start to thrive, or how to start to adapt yourself to that learning. And then as you continue down the spiral, you lose either resources, or you lose support, or you lose help or structure. And that's when either teachers or students begin to get overwhelmed. And that overwhelmed, they can either get out of that curve, or they can begin to start to spiral downward. Once they begin that spiral downward, it's really, really challenging to get our students back up through that, but it also begins with our teachers, our parents, our support, our liaisons, our partners, anybody in education that can help us to reach and succeed. So we really have to focus on our social emotional learning for not only our students, like we said, but we have to focus on our faculty, we have to focus on our staff, we have to focus on our teachers, giving them the support, and not through just more money, because research has shown that throwing more money at them isn't necessarily equitable, but really providing not only time, but time to do their profession, time to research, time to be in professional development, really reaching out and using those dollars to make our teachers better teachers. Give them the basis of what they came into the profession for, and give them the support that they need in order to do the job they can in the most equitable way that they can.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry, to piggyback on the idea of time. Time is the one thing you can't buy. And one of the big things is with parents. At our school, in particular, we notice that the parents don't have a lot of time at home with the kids, or they may not have, you may not have a lot of direct support that we'd like to see, like trying to reach out to them. They're busy working a job. You have to call them at certain times. It's very difficult to reach out to them. And they're finding it difficult to provide the support for the kids that they need. So if we could somehow provide support more to the parents, and I know there's talk about simple things like bringing in washing machines into school, or doing like more of a community outreach and providing community service sort of thing, but if there's some way to provide time to free up time for the parents, or free up, if they're working a couple jobs, pay for them to do something where they can take a day off and come in and spend time at the school, or do something like that for the parents. Like, and in addition to the teachers too, give us some free up our time, but certainly for the parents, I think as well, that's a big factor.
Which is an allowable expense. So is not the massage, but the mindfulness is an allowable expense. So the things that you've talked about are allowable expenses right now. Yes?
I think they need to bring back vocational training, because they are talking about welding and all these other things, but unless your father does it or your uncle, how are you getting into this career? Like, I don't think and who got us through the pandemic? Who is working?
That's right. So our idea of who's first responder has changed. So I will tell you that as one of the things that we're missing here is when the war in Ukraine started, let me tell you why the prices have gone up. It's not just gas, but we realized that we depend on other nations to do everything for us. And what do I mean by that? We can have an iPhone here, but the chips are built somewhere else. Another part of the phone is built in another place. America has outsourced too much of our industry. So we are very reliant on other nations. What did we see during the pandemic? How long did it take you to get anything? Because it was coming from overseas. So when you talk about vocational, that used to be a dirty word. But that has to be part of the work we're doing. So I'll tell you that we are requiring now all middle and high schools in Rhode Island to have a track. Not college or, it's both. You're going to graduate with a diploma, ready to go to college, but you have to have some CTE training. Because where are the welders going to come from? Where are the people who are going to build the microchips? STEM, crucial. You heard today, they can't find people to work in NASA. We are not producing the talent that we need. And I just want to be clear, we're not saying one or the other. You should be college ready, but you should have that other vantage point. Because not everybody's going to go to college, but I should have the option. So think policy. In your mind, we're pushing this. So look at the, how many books did we see banned during the pandemic? Everybody was heightened, right? Everything was happening all at once. CRT, whether you believe it exists or not, or does, or whatever, it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of disinformation out there. So what do our kids need to learn? As you start moving forward, science is a key place to have this conversation. We're questioning whether climate change exists. We're a divided nation. So how do we integrate what we know to make a change? And you know who you have to sit with is the people that have a different viewpoint than you do. Because we have a tendency in education to sit with people that think the same way that we do. So that's why we saw all these things. And we see but right now, our education system is in peril. When you have places that say, don't say gay, I'm sorry, because we're in Florida. We've taken, 20 steps backwards? So how do we use this time to galvanize us? CTE, extremely important. If you don't have it in every middle school and in every high school, you are missing the boat. You're missing an opportunity to move our nation forward. Because the question is, what is education, what is our education meant to do, our education system? Many of the decisions that have been made have been galvanized in the history of the United States, have been around industry. So how are we preparing our students for that industry? But this is where we are right now, which is what we heard from the teacher. How many of you feel exhausted? Oh, some of you don't? She kept her hand up. So how do we go from exhausted to invigorated? How do we get there? How do we change the trajectory? That's the question that we have to answer for ourselves. We're looking at STEM and integration. How do we use what we're doing today to actually effectuate change? Those of you that are superintendents, I watched earlier when they asked if you had a 3D printer. If you have schools that do not have 3D printers, we're missing the boat. If your kids are not creating and designing, we're missing the boat. You see what we've been doing here for the last day? How many of you have gone to a conference and you have been so excited to compete against the person sitting next to you? This is what education should look like. But that is not what we're doing. How many of us have gone back to being pre-pandemic? Be honest. What have you changed? And I have to tell you, we weren't doing that great pre-pandemic anyway. So if that's what we're going back to, then we've done nothing. I challenge all of you that have access, and if you're a teacher and you don't have access, because money doesn't change anything, but the policy does. But the policy with the money makes a big difference. How are you starting your day? So some of the things that we have tried to do is reimagine what education is going to look like. So what are our high schools going to look like? One of the things that we understood during the pandemic, a lot of our kids need to work. That's not a luxury. You can't ask a kid to decide whether they have to go to work or come to school. Because guess what? They're going to go to work. Our attendance rate, I don't know for you, but what does your attendance rate look like? It's not great, because we're going back to an education system that does not make sense for the population that we have today. So one of the things that we're doing in Rhode Island, aside from requiring CTE from middle school to high school, is also to rethink what high schools will look like. High schools should start at 7 o'clock in the morning and end at 10 o'clock at night. And kids should be able to come in and out. If I have to work from 1 to 6, what am I missing? What does that look like? What opportunities are we taking? So I'm asking you, reimagine what the system can look like. The second thing we're doing is changing our licensing rules. So we can also bring in scientists. So we can also bring people from the industry in to help us rethink how we do this. So policy matters, guys. It matters a great deal. So how do we reimagine what our education system can look like? If you're going back to the same 8 to 3, we're going to be left behind. So how do we bring in people? I'm just using your example of the welding. I don't know how many teachers know how to weld, but you bring in somebody that actually knows how to weld. You have the kids go and get paid. So we're doing paid internships for everyone in high school. That's what we're using our money for, paid internships. If you have to work, you are going to get paid to go to school. The science, the technology, wind power energy. Our kids are in these fields learning. I challenge us to use this stimulus money in a very different way than we have thought about before. We're talking about integrating STEM. How else can we do that? And if you're saying, I'm a teacher, I don't have access to that, write it up, guys. Put it front and center, because you do. And just so that you guys know, there's more money coming our way. But they're going to hold us accountable for the dollars. What are we doing different? So I'll give you a little bit more. I'm an educator that said, I'm not a politician. I don't want to know about politics. But if you're not at the table, you're on the table, guys. So you are a politician. And that means having the conversation with everyone. So what does that mean for our students? Civics education. How many of you have civics as a requirement? You need to have civics required in your schools. That's how we can have people, I want a mask, I don't want a mask, I can't tell you how much hate mail I got. Why? Because we can't discern what's true and what's not true. We don't even know how to use our system appropriately. So we're requiring civics education. Financial literacy. How many of our kids cannot balance a checkbook? Well, there are no checkbooks, but their Venmo account or Cash App, whatever it is. Extremely important. Computer science. Every single classroom has to have computer science. Math. Whether you're a math person or not, it doesn't matter. We know it's a gatekeeper. We know we can't do this work without having math. So what do? We have to create that pathway. And if you don't have the expertise, because I have to tell you, we're experiencing a teacher shortage like no other. And it's coming again. Like, we're in a bad place this year, it's going to be worse next year. So what do we need to do? We do need to take care of our teachers. We do need to have this profession elevated. We do need to pay them more. But we need to bring people with expertise. I think we have made it so hard to be a teacher that we're going to be in crisis if we already aren't. But it's not just teaching the same way we've taught, because it doesn't make sense. So our charge in Rhode Island is going to be CTE, math, across the board. And not really having just math the way that we've thought about it in the past, but really having it be interactive, really pushing the envelope. So I challenge all of you to think about what is going to be different in your system. What are the skills that our kids need, and how are we giving it to them at an earlier age? So if you're going to have CTE in every school, and I'm just talking about Rhode Island, civic engagement, financial literacy, computer-based programming, and every school is going to have a 3D printer, because you just cannot do this work without it. So how are you thinking about the integration, and how are you pushing the envelope? The other thing that I want to also express is everybody's talking about tutoring. It just can't be for math and literacy. But it's about critical thinking. And a tutoring program only works if you're going to do science, if you're going to do any kind of tutoring, if it is consistent with the same person every single day. The research is pretty clear, because I see us going back to the same old, same old. So it makes me very worried about where we are. So what do we do different starting tomorrow? How do we think about pushing the envelope? The other thing we're challenging is SEEK credits in high school. The Carnegie SEEK credits. How many of you thought, why do you have to have a one-period science class? Why? This is the time to push the envelope. We're going to challenge that. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. So how do we think about high school, secondary education a little differently? Challenge those seat time, those credits. Do you really need all those credits? I don't think so. We'll let you know. The other piece is we've added $115,000 per district, which isn't a lot of money. So just in case you don't know, states don't get to keep the money. The money goes down to the district level. We only get a 5% set aside of the money that comes in. With that 5% set aside, we've given $115,000 to every district for mini grants in STEM. It's not a lot of money, but we want you to think out of the box. We want people to be able to exercise. And I have to tell you, you don't want people like me who are bureaucrats making those decisions for you. What you want people like me is to give you the resources, the support, and the cover. And what do I mean by that? That when you want to color outside of the lines, I take the hit. As long as we do it together, I take the hit. The same thing we did when we wanted to buy the devices. What are they going to do? You just do what's right, and then you ask for forgiveness later. How do you integrate this, guys? That's what we need to do. And that's the only way we were able to stay open the entire time was by blurring the lines and the rules. And my job was to block and tackle for my superintendents, principals, and teachers. And I want us all to go back renewed with energy and figuring out how the learning that's taking place here, we're going to put into practice differently. I want to thank you all for listening. I was going to go through all the slides, but I don't think that you want to. Oh, that's not mine. I just want to leave all of us thinking, what are we going to do? What is going to be our legacy in the classroom, in the school building, and in the district? And look for people who have already done it. We have a tendency of wanting to do things by ourselves. Not good. And just to give you a preview, we're going to be releasing, I was in Aspen last week, and we are going to be releasing new principles that are going to be used by the Department of Education on what an American education means. Because we're not in a good place. When we're fighting, when Congress is fighting about simple little things, we have to figure out what we can agree upon. And it's not just that we think our kids need an education. It's what kind of an education. So I want to thank you all for listening. And if any of you want a job in Rhode Island, I will hire you. You're ready? Let's go. Let's go. But I will tell you that the last thing I'll tell you is that Providence has been labeled the lowest performing district in the nation. And the way that we're going to turn it around is by having STEM at the helm. Every single school. And the other piece that I want to really stress is the condition of the buildings. Because you can't do the work if you don't have the buildings that are equipped to do the work and the training that goes along with it. So we have used our money for that too. Not to fix HVACs, but to reimagine what the classroom can look like. So that is extremely important for us, and I look forward to continuing to partner and hopefully showing you what removing seat time looks like in the next year to come. So thank you all.